Dear chess friends, this is MVP bringing you the ninth part of my international chess course on the Caro-Kann defense. And now it will be a very rare continuation. I think they can be called exotical systems. So let's start with e4, c6, and here b3. b3 is a slightly unusual continuation. White is just bringing the bishop on b2, d5, and bishop b2. Of course, it takes d5, c takes d5, bishop b2, knight c6, knight f3, knight f6. This for an advantage for leg, because it's like the exchange variation, but the b2 bishop looks slightly stupid here. So bishop b2, just sacrificing a pawn, d takes e4, knight c3, knight e2, bishop e5, knight g3, 6 is the same. So knight c3, knight f6, knight g2, bishop f5, knight g3, e6, queen e2. And here black should try bishop b4. White now has a chance to take the bishop on f5, castles, but black exchanges the other bishop, bishop c3. If d takes c3, then knight b d7, c4, bishop g6, h4, h5, f3, e takes f3, g takes f3, and queen c7. The next move would be castle long, so rook g1, castle long. White has some compensation, but nothing more. If white takes on c3 with the bishop, then bishop g6, h4, h5, f3, e takes f3, g takes f3, queen c7, knight f4, knight b d7. Of course, white has here also some compensation for the sacrificed pawn, but black will just castle on, and white has no attack, just the pawn down. So the next move is knight f3. It was recommended in Secret of Open Surprises. d5, it takes d5, c takes d5, and knight e5. Black plays knight c6, d4, e6. Of course, now bishop on c8 is bad, but white spent just a little time on playing with the knight on f3, then on e5, maybe they will take on c6. So if he has c3, then bishop d6 and f4. We saw such pawn structure in the chapter 1. Black can play knight h6, bishop d3, castles, castles, f6, knight g4, queen g4, knight e7, queen g3, and bishop d7. Black is just bringing the bishop on g6, so the bishops would be exchanged. Here black has slight advantage. If bishop b5, then bishop d7. Of course, knight d7 is okay for black. Queen d7. Then they can the black player can start a queenside pawn minority attack. For example, c3, bishop d6, knight d2, knight f6, knight f3, h6 with the following a6, b5. So bishop c6, castles, knight f6. It is important to take g4 square from white's queen. Bishop g5, bishop e7, knight d2, castles, c3, rook c8, f4. Here the white's plan is to play rook f3, rook h3 with an attack, but black has just enough time to play knight e8, bishop e7, queen e7, rook f3 and f6, knight d3, knight d6, then black can play bishop e8, bishop g6, and due to white square e4, the position is more or less equal. So now let's talk about some Blackburn Dimmer gambit. It is d4, d5, knight c3, d takes f4, and f3. It's a dubious line. Of course, bishop c4, knight f6, f3, e takes f3 is the same. So f3, e takes f3, of course, queen takes f3 is just a losing move due to queen d4, bishop a3, queen b4, castle's long, and the bishop g4, so knight f3 is a better option, knight f6. Bishop d3 is not so active move like bishop c4, bishop g4, bishop e3, e6, castles, bishop d6, queen e1, knight bd7, queen h4, and just taking on f3 and queen c7. Black will castle long, so they the black player just has an extra pawn with no compensation for white. So bishop c4 and bishop f5 just for blocking the f file. If castles, then e6, knight e5, bishop g6, bishop g5, knight bd7. If knight d7, then just queen d7 with an extra pawn, and if knight g6, h take g6, queen f3, knight b6 with advantage for black. But on queen e2, we just can play knight e5, d takes f5, queen d4, king h1, and bishop h5, taking the d1 square under control, queen e1, knight d7, with a big advantage for black. And if knight e5, e6, g4, then black can play knight fd7. Castles already loses due to knight e5, g takes f5, knight c4. So white has to play g takes f5 and knight e5, and of course bishop on c2 is on c4 is hanging. If d takes f5, then queen h4 with decisive advantage. So bishop e2 and queen h4, king f1, queen h3, king g1 can give black an option to come to the endgame after e takes f5, bishop f1, queen g4 with an extra pawn, and if king e1, then bishop e7. If d takes f5, it just loses immediately after queen g2, rook f1, bishop h4, king d2, knight a6, with the idea of rook d8, king e3, bishop g5, rook f4, bishop f4, king f4, queen f2, bishop f3, rook d8, and the journey of white's king came to an end. Queen a2, queen h4, of course king a3, queen d4 mate, and bishop g4, then rook d4 with the decisive attack. But here is the move bishop f4, knight e7, f takes e6, queen takes e6, and we can say that white would have a compensation for the sacrifice pawn if they could now castle short, but they played king f1 and then king e1, so they have to spend a lot of time to improve the coordination of pieces, and black has a slightly better position here. So let's talk about the most important variation in this chapter. It is Spielmann's variation. It is knight c3, d5, and here comes queen f3, slightly shocking continuation. Black frequently plays d4, but it's just bad move due to bishop c4. So I think that d takes e4, knight takes e4, knight f6 is possible. Of course, we will see in the classical variations that the move knight f6 is not recommended by me. But here it has this advantage because white played a dubious move, queen to f3, so here black just easily equalizes. If knight takes f6, then it takes f6, bishop c4, knight d7 with the idea of knight e5. So knight e2, knight b6, the other idea is bishop b3 and bishop d6. White can transpose to an endgame, but after queen e4, queen e7, king e7, black will play bishop e6, and the position is more or less equal. Interesting option is d3, knight b d7, bishop d2. White wants to castle long, so the position is unclear. G6, castle long, bishop g7, king b1, castle short, h3, knight b6. So it's a black who has an easier attack here after a5, a4, a3, and white has no such attacking plan. So think that maybe black is slightly better in this position. The main continuation is bishop c4, and here we can play knight b7 with the idea of knight e5. Now white frequently does a mistake by playing d4. The better move is knight takes f6 and just it takes f6 with an equal position after knight e2, knight e5 with the idea of taking the bishop, queen e4, queen e7, bishop b3, and then just a5, a3, and knight g6. White has to change the queens. If they change the queens on e7, then black plays bishop e6 with equality, and if f3, then queen e4, f takes e4, a4, bishop a2, bishop a6, and the resulting endgame is equal. If bishop b3, then already a new move, a5 with the idea of a4, and after e3, e6, black now wants to play knight d4 and knight c5. So here d5, d4 is a critical move, but c5. So white has to play bishop e3, a4. If bishop c4, then queen a5, bishop d2, queen b6, and either b2 or d4 pawn is lost. And if bishop a2, then queen a5, c3, bishop a7. If knight c5, then knight c5, d takes c5, bishop c5, bishop c5, queen takes c5. Then black can play queen c7, bishop d7, bishop c6 with an equal game. And if knight f6, then knight f6, queen e2, bishop d7 with the idea, bishop c6. Black just has a slight space advantage on the queen side, so the position is more or less equal. But frequently white plays d4, and it's a mistake because knight b6 follows. If knight f6, then g takes f6 suddenly, queen b3, knight c4, queen c4, and rook g8. White has a big problems with the defender of g2 pawn, because g3 just bishop e6 with big advantage for black. So bishop d3 is played, but here black should try queen takes d4, knight e2, and the black player can play bishop d7, just wanted to exchange the queens from the board. Of course, knight f6, it takes f6, the black just has an extra pawn, and if h3, then knight e4, bishop e4 is bad due to f5, bishop d3, e5 with a strong center. So queen e4, then queen d5, queen h4, bishop f5, and black just castles alone. Bishop f5, queen f5, castles e6, queen g3, castle queenside with a big advantage for black. So that's all. In this chapter, we analyzed very rare and exotic continuation here. Almost everywhere, white is the side that sacrifices the material, and the black just can take the material, and black can just defend themselves easily. The only good option for white in this chapter is the Spielmann's variation with knight c3 and queen f3. Here white has some ideas, but we saw that just by neutralizing the white's knight from f4 by playing knight f6 and then playing knight d7, black has no problems, because they want black wants to play knight e5 with the exchange of bishop c4, and I think that any line except the Spielmann's variation are very bad, but this chapter was needed to ending the covering of the opening repertoire. So this is the last chapter of the rare moves. In the next chapter we will talk about the pawn of attack, and that's all for today. Thanks you for watching the video till the end. If you like this video, you can consider leaving a like, and see you next time.